Don't scare her.
What? What's wrong?
Cher is saving herself for Luke Perry.
Cher, you're a virgin? God, you say like it's a bad thing.
Besides, the PC term is hymenally challenged.
I am just not interested in doing it until I find the right person. You see how picky I am about my shoes, and they only go on my feet.
A popular teenager who only cares about clothes and her social status decides to start doing good deeds for others, with mixed results. This week, we discuss the dangers of liposuction, this movie's most memorable line, and why James should have read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Then we find out if 1995's Clueless stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time. My name is Alan Noah, and you are, I want to say, Jim something?
No. Well, I guess someone can call me that, but James, we've had a 200-something podcast together, and we've known each other for longer than we haven't known each other.
No, really? Wait, we met in 1999, so I guess so. Wow, we've known each other more than half of our lives?
The pre-James life is getting smaller and smaller, and the post-meeting James life is just getting more of your life every day.
Wow, that's kind of impressive / depressing, no offense. You know, our friend Eddie, who's been on the show a couple times, he once called me and he was like, it just occurred to me that we met 20 years ago today. And I was like, wait, what? And I was very impressed that he knew that he remembered that he thought to call me on that day, that it had been 20 years since we'd been friends. I mean, I guess that's just what happens when you get to this age. You hit those kinds of milestones.
Well, I guess those milestones are always there. Like, I'm sure your son has friends like, I've known you longer than I haven't known you, because he's known him since kindergarten.
That's true. I guess you just get a little bit more nostalgic about it as you get a little older.
It's like they said in The Office. One of the best lines in The Office was when Andy says, I spent all my time when I was in Scranton talking about my times at Cornell. And now that I'm living in Ithaca, I spend all my time talking about my friends in Scranton. And then he says, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days during the good old days.
Aw, that's deep. I say they're all the good old days. But speaking of good old days, I guess kinda, today we're going to be talking about Clueless, which is a teen movie, and it's part of a long tradition of teen movies, some of which we've reviewed on this podcast. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which was also directed by Amy Heckerling, like Clueless. A bunch of the John Hughes movies, The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And that's just one of those genres that every couple of years, there's just another teen movie. It just never goes out of style.
And there's movies that they really kind of define the moment. If you want to know what 80s kids were into, you got to look more at like A Breakfast Club and A Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You had American Pie. There was Superbad. There's always a teen comedy for every generation.
Multiple, I think. I think you usually get more than one a generation. Maybe one that like defines the generation, perhaps, if you're that lucky.
Right. I mean, you might have more of the deeper one and then more of the sex comedy. And then, then there always seems to be like a partying one too. I remember this rumor that American Pie was pitched to the studio as teen sex comedy that you can make for under $10 million as the title of the movie.
No, not as the title of the movie, as the title of the pitch.
Right, the title of the screenplay was basically teen sex comedy that you can make for under $10 million. Because if you think about it, the name American Pie sounds like a last-minute title anyway.
Yeah, it's not a very descriptive title. Did you see Booksmart that came out last year?
No, I didn't. That's Olivia Wilde. She directed that, right?
Yes. Very, very, very funny. Highly recommend. We watched that, I don't know, maybe a week or two ago. That sort of fits into that mold of it's a sex comedy, but also kind of like trying to be a little bit deep and emotional. It was very entertaining. I very much enjoyed that. Recommend. I think it's on Hulu or something, maybe. But yeah, I mean, let's talk about Clueless. Did you see that in 1995 when it came out, 25 years ago?
I definitely didn't see this film in the theater, but this is one of those that quickly became a popular film for people our age. So I probably saw it on VHS.
I definitely saw it in the theater. I don't remember if it was me who wanted to see it more or my sister Samantha. I mean, I think it was marketed more towards girls. She's almost 2 years younger than me, but I probably didn't have to be dragged to it because I was pretty in love with Alicia Silverstone from those 3 Aerosmith videos, Crazy, Amazing, and Crying. At 15 years old, I would have gladly watched her in probably anything.
Oh, yeah. She has a role as basically the hot girl of 3 Aerosmith music videos that were from a hugely successful album. What was that from?
Get a Grip.
Get a Grip. That was the one with the cow udders on the cover, I think. Yeah. So this was the movie that was starring the Aerosmith girl. But Alicia Silverstone happened to hook up with Amy Heckerling, who is the writer-director of this film. And she is a very famous and accomplished director herself, having directed one of the previous most famous teen comedies ever. That was Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that we both reviewed and we both felt still stood up today. And it certainly was still popular in 1995.
Yeah, and Amy Heckerling wasn't really initially that into the idea of doing another teen movie because she had done Fast Times, but she was apparently inspired by Emma, the Jane Austen novel, and she kind of thought that she could do a retelling of that story set in modern day, at the time, mid-90s, Beverly Hills. And why don't you tell us about the movie in case people haven't seen it in 25 years, James?
Yeah, this film stars Alicia Silverstone, and she plays Cher Horowitz. Cher is a wealthy teenager who's one of the most popular students at her Beverly Hills high school. After Cher successfully gets 2 lonely teachers together, she decides to give the uncool and awkward new student Ty, played by Brittany Murphy, a makeover. And Cher sets Ty up with fellow cool kid Elton. But when that backfires, Cher tries to get herself a boyfriend, which also fails. When Cher sees that Ty has become even more popular than she is, she reevaluates her priorities and finally decides to be a better friend in person. She also finds love with her ex-stepbrother, played by Paul Rudd.
A very young baby-faced Paul Rudd, although to be fair, 25 years later, he still kind of looks baby-faced.
Well, it's a Paul Rudd without any of the Ant-Man scars.
I mean, does he have Ant-Man scars?
CGI scars. But this film came out in 1995, July 21st, and had a $20 million budget, and it actually opened at number 2, behind the $12 million made by, the Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes film, which of course is, Al?
Apollo 13.
Yes, because of course you know these 3 American and world heroes.
Because you literally never stop talking about them?
Well, the world never should stop talking about our heroes. But anyway, the film wound up grossing $56 million domestically. And it's interesting, there really is no international gross from this. And that makes a lot of sense because I could totally see this film not really having international appeal.
I mean, it's definitely an American movie. It's definitely an LA movie for sure. I mean, I just said for sure, like a Californian. It's got that whole, LA vibe. Which came first, this or Beverly Hills 90210? Like, when did that start?
Oh, not even close. Beverly Hills 90210 was first. That came out when we were in like elementary school.
Really?
Yeah, I would say it came out in 1990.
I'm looking it up right now. 1990. You are correct.
Yeah.
You know your stuff. The movie starts with a cover of Kids in America. We get a look at Cher's life. In voiceover, grumble, grumble, says Alan, she tells us that, oh my God, my life isn't really like a Noxzema commercial, which right out of the gate, I was like, okay, that's a reference that doesn't necessarily stand the test of time. I mean, Noxzema is still a brand, but I don't know what their commercials look like. I don't think people would get that reference necessarily.
No, and it's funny you mention this because at the time, I'd say that two of the most random popular teenage girls were that girl from the Aerosmith videos, which turned out to be Alicia Silverstone, and also the Noxzema girl. The Noxzema was a big brand back then, but no one would understand that today.
Who was the Noxzema girl? Was that Kerry Russell?
No. Looked like her, but it was not Kerry Russell.
Oh, all right. There's also this like scene of Cher getting dressed with the aid of her computer, and it's a very like early 90s looking Windows system, very pixelated, that's kind of helping her pick out her outfits. It just looks silly. It was definitely supposed to look really cool at the time. Like, whoa, she's so into fashion. She even has her computer help her.
You know, I remember thinking that that was incredibly stupid back then. That looked like what Hollywood thought was futuristic, but I remember thinking there's no way she would do this. I'm not even going to call it as a test of time thing. I'm going to call it as like, yeah, that was just pretty silly.
It was. It definitely was. And we see Cher at her high school. We meet her best friend, Dion, who is also beautiful and rich. And she mentions that both Cher and Dion were named for singers who now do infomercials. Again, a reference to something that doesn't stand the test of time. Well, Dionne Warwick might still do infomercials. Cher doesn't, I don't think.
I have no idea what Cher ever did, but Dionne Warwick was famously on the Psychic Friends network, so that was kind of a scam.
Right, she was known for that. I don't remember Cher ever doing infomercials, but okay. You know, we did just talk about her last week in Moonstruck when she was a serious actress and, you know, won an Oscar. I don't know, I guess a handful of years later, she had fallen on some tough times. I don't know.
Yeah, and her friend Dionne, she's played by Stacey Dash, and I had no idea about this. She's 29 years old at the time of the filming of this. Alicia Silverstone, she is, it looks like she's like 18 or so, if you assume it was filmed in like 94. She was born in 1976. So they didn't necessarily look like teenagers, but I think that's more because of the high fashion that they wore, that even as a kid, I thought they looked a lot older than us.
Yeah, I mean, some of the actors look older than others. Brittany Murphy, who plays Ty, who we'll talk about in a little bit, she was younger. I think she was around 18, 19. She looks younger. Donald Faison, who plays Dionne's boyfriend Murray, he was in his 20s, but they made him look really young, mostly because of the braces they slapped in his mouth, which definitely make him look like an awkward teenager, even though he wasn't.
Jeremy Sisto is one of those guys that I feel like he was probably able to get into a bar when he was like 15. He just kind of looks like a lot older than everyone else.
Right. And in this high school, the rich kids have cell phones. They're kind of huge and funny looking, but obviously it's not like today when you just assume that everybody has a cell phone. In this world, it's kind of a bigger deal that these kids are kids who have cell phones. At one point, Murray says to Dionne, you know, like, hey, I've been trying to page you. Why aren't you returning any of my pages? I think outside of the medical profession, nobody would get what paging even means anymore.
No, but it sets up this high school really well because Cher and Dionne, we see them in different parts of the school and they're talking on cell phones to each other. And then the second they meet, which I believe this is in the trailer, the second they meet up with each other, they go, oh, and kind of close their phones and fold the antennas down. Like, oh my God, these rich kids, they can't even wait a minute before they speak to each other. Like, I remember thinking that, and not that that was unrealistic. I'm like, that's so weird. People with cell phones are really do that? I wasn't sure they did. And now I go, okay, yeah, like your friend's 5 minutes away and you have someone to tell them. Are you going to wait? No, you're going to text them. Not necessarily call them, but that was definitely something that I remember thinking was ahead of its time. And now that would be literally any high school in the world.
Yes, that's right. And even just talking on cell phones doesn't even stand the test of time anymore. But it's apparently like report card time for Cher, and she is upset about this grade that she's gotten from her teacher, Mr. Hall, which actually kind of sounds like Mr. Hand from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Interesting. It didn't even occur to me till just now as I was saying that. But Mr. Hall is played by the great Wallace Shawn, who we know as Vizzini, right? Vizzini from The Princess Bride?
Right. Or for people that don't remember, he's the guy that keeps saying inconceivable.
No, he's the guy who keeps saying inconceivable.
That's it.
But Cher is mad about this grade that she gets from Mr. Hall, and she decides that the reason that he gave her a bad grade wasn't because she did a bad job, even though she did do a bad job in her debate when she was talking about Haitians and called them Haitians.
Yeah, I love her debate. She has no idea what she's talking about, and she tries to make the plight of the Haitians is like the time that she was throwing a party, and then she just ends it with, and it doesn't say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty. Like, it's one of these speeches where everyone in the audience was fine with it, and then the teacher was like, yeah, that was terrible. It was a total Billy Madison moment when the vice principal is like, everyone is stupider for having heard that.
Right. It is a bad speech, and Cher deserves the bad grade, but she thinks that it's just because Mr. Hall is single and lonely. So she takes it upon herself to try to set him up with another teacher, Miss Geist. And she's kind of doing a good thing, but it's really to serve her own purposes so that she can negotiate for a better grade. This negotiating for grades is something that her father is very proud of her for, because he's a high-priced litigator, which Cher says in voiceover is the scariest kind of lawyer.
Yeah, he's played by this actor, Dan Hedaya. He is a fantastic actor. Whenever he pops up and stuff, he's very, very funny. I mean, he's funny, sort of unintentionally funny sometimes, but he's great in this film. He doesn't look anything like Alicia Silverstone, but Cher's mother, who obviously was this absolute beauty, but Cher's mother died, and she died in what she terms a freak liposuction accident, which is kind of a joke because, you know, of course this Beverly Hills woman is getting liposuction, and, you know, that's how she would have died.
How common is that for people to die because of liposuction? That did happen to Kanye West's mom. I mean, that's like the famous one that I know of.
Yeah, I mean, if you exclude, you know, those stories you hear once in a while of some unlicensed doctor doing liposuction and killing people, I actually looked this up because I was curious, and according to a 2017 study in the Journal of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery...
Do you subscribe?
Yeah. But according to this study, the total complication rate for liposuction is approximately 5% of all procedures, with the vast majority of them being minor complications. However, studies show that deaths from the procedure are as high as 1 in 5,000. That's very small. That's incredibly small.
But it can happen.
I mean, you got to assume 5,000 liposuctions go on daily, right? So, I mean, I have no idea, but it sounds possible around the world. So, any procedure where you're going under is a risk to your life.
Right.
Kanye West's mother died of it. The late Joan Rivers died while under anesthesia. It's a dangerous thing. It's not something lighthearted.
No. But so after Cher sets up these two teachers, she sort of likes doing nice things. And there's a new girl at her school, Ty Frazier, played by a young Brittany Murphy. And the natural thing that Cher should do would be to ignore this lame new kid. But she decides she's going to like adopt her and take her under her wing and give her a makeover. And it's an intense makeover. It's not just changing the way that her hair is done, but it's changing her wardrobe. It's trying to change the way that she talks. She tries to get her to use big words like sporadically. She has her work out with the Buns of Steel VHS tape She's like, you have to read a book that's not for school. And then Ty says, oh, I'll read this one. Men are from Mars. Women are from Venus. These are all very 1990s references. I never read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, but it seemed like a lot of people did.
Well, that falls into the mid to late 90s when I worked at Barnes & Noble. So I pretty much know every single novel and book that was popular on the bestseller list, Oprah's book club from that 3-year era. And this book never left the New York Times bestseller list. It's just one of those things on there for years and years. But no, I did not read it.
I figured at that point, maybe you would have just picked it up to see what it was about.
A 16-year-old, I guess a 16-year-old who had no girlfriend. Would that have been dating advice for a 16-year-old trying to get a girlfriend now?
A 16-year-old who didn't have a girlfriend and loved space. I mean, why wouldn't you have read it?
I guess finding out all the life forms on Venus and Mars and how they somehow reproduce when they're a single-sex society, and how the Venetians reproduce in a hydrochloric acid environment, and how they reproduce in a 30 psi environment when they're not flattened like pancakes. Man, I gotta get this book.
Yeah, you really do. Ty is kind of taken at school by this guy, Travis Birkenstock, which is a little bit of an eye roll worthy name. He's played by Breckin Meyer, and he's a stoner, and they clearly are a good pair, Travis and Ty. But because Travis is a stoner, Cher says, no, you can't date him. You need to date this boy, Elton, who's another quote unquote cool kid. He's in their clique.
Yeah, and Elton is played by Jeremy Sisto. Did you know him in anything else? No. I knew him. He had a long role in 6 Feet Under. He's the kind of schizophrenic brother-in-law. He's fantastic in that. And he plays a kind of a douchey guy. At first you think he's just kind of your typical popular jerk kids. And then you realize later he's actually a pretty rotten guy. And he's really into Cher. Knowing this, and watching the film, you can tell he grabs her, he kisses her, and Cher has no idea. She just thinks Elton is you kind of friend. But this guy totally wants her.
Right. And it all kind of comes to a head at this party in the valley, which Travis invites Ty to. And at first Cher's like, no, we're not going to a party in the valley because ew, the valley. In Southern California, if you live in Beverly Hills, you don't go to the valley. Okay, I think that means a lot to people who live in that area and very, very little to the rest of America. But whatever. And, the party is kind of a fun scene. It has the Rollin' With My Homies, which I think is a somewhat well-known part of the movie where they're all kind of doing the little hand motion as they're rolling with their homies.
But they sing it wrong when they do it. When she bumps her head, Elton's like, can you sing Rollin' With the Homies? And it's Rollin' With My Homies.
Don't misquote Coolio. He does not appreciate that.
I wonder if it's one of those, he's the real cool guy trying to be like, hey, you know the song, but he doesn't even know the lyrics. I wonder if that's subtle or if they both, just didn't know it, both those characters. Although, to be fair, Ty just hit her head twice.
Right. Yeah, Brittany Murphy really goes all in on the physical comedy. I kind of forgot that about this movie. She goes for it. I mean, she's doing pratfalls and knocking her head in every other scene. She'll do whatever she needed to do for a laugh. And, we said it in the 8 Mile episode, but just a tragedy that she died so young. She was really just going for it.
Yeah, it really was. She was hysterical in the right roles. And I've said it before, one of my favorite cartoons of all time is King of the Hill. And she played the dim-witted Luann Platter. And she was hysterical in that. She was kind of like the cousin from the trailer park. For that reason alone, I don't want them to ever make any more King of the Hills. Bring it back, like they do. Animated things you can bring back very easily. But without Luann and without Brittany Murphy, it's not the same.
Right. But after the party, Cher tries to get Elton to take Ty home, but they're kind of doing like this back and forth with who's going to drive who home. And eventually Elton takes Cher home and he puts the moves on her. She says no. He is really aggressive. And she's like, just get off of me. She gets out of the car and Elton, the jerk that he is, just drives away, which is awful on 15 levels. One, that he attacks her. Two, that he leaves her in this random parking lot. She's mugged. A guy puts a gun to her head. And at that point, she has to call someone for a ride. She uses a payphone to call her ex-stepbrother, Josh. That's the young Paul Rudd character. Her father and his mother were married briefly, so they're not blood relatives, and they don't really like each other. But it does seem like they're flirting with each other pretty much the whole movie.
Yeah, and there's a great line. It's probably the line I remember most from this film. The dad says to Cher, because Cher's like, why does that guy even come over anymore? You were only married to his mom for like a minute. And he goes, Cher, you divorce wives. You do not divorce stepchildren. I've never had stepchildren or, anything like that, so I wouldn't know, but that's a very sweet thing for him to say. You get the impression from what Josh says that the mother who's now married to her fourth husband, she's not really around as much. So he's kind of like, look, the guy doesn't have family out here. I was his stepdad, so of course he comes in and out as he goes. Like, I really like that about him.
I think that's so funny that that's like the one line from this movie you remember. It's a fairly quotable movie, even just in terms of like the, as if, and like the, I can't have balls flying at my face. Well, there goes your social life. But you remember the line about not divorcing stepchildren. I think that says a lot about your character too, James.
It's such a unique line. The balls in your face line, which we didn't talk about, was they're in gym, just waiting to hit a tennis machine. So first of all, the fact that they have tennis as a high school sport is, very telling. But also, all of the girls in the class have a different excuse for why they can't play. My favorite is, my tennis pro, he doesn't want me playing any tennis that might interfere with his instruction method. And then someone else says that her plastic surgeon doesn't want her going anything where balls might be flying past her face. And then someone goes, well, there goes your social life. I agree. They are quotable. They're funny lines. I just didn't really remember them. And I guess when she said as if, I was like, oh, yeah, I remember that. But this one was a film. If you asked me to say a line from Clueless, I probably would have said the divorce line.
That's really, really funny. But so the whole Ty with Elton thing doesn't work out. And Cher has this thing about not dating high school boys. She will only date older boys, which is accurate. I mean, I remember when I was in high school and I couldn't get a date to save my life, all the pretty girls that were in high school with me, they were all dating college guys.
I don't know if it's a test of time thing. I think it more just be not that 2020 looks on it differently. I think just when you're older and 2020 looks differently. But when I was a freshman, I remember there was like the most popular girl in our grade only dated seniors. And then sophomore, junior, and senior year, she only dated college guys. And thinking like, she's the coolest girl ever. But I never gave it a thought until I was older to be like, oh, those dudes are dating a 15-year-old. And I'm like, oh, from her perspective, whatever, she's dating an older guy. But like, it's still kind of creepy. And she has this line where she's teaching Ty about like which guys she can date. And she's talking about how Elton's crew of Pop You're a Kid, she goes, those are the only acceptable boys to date here. But she says, if you're considering dating high school boys, because she very much thinks it's a cool thing to date college guys. And in this case, like she's 16 because she just got her driver's license. Right. And so it's a little creepy.
See, I remember thinking in high school that like, okay, yeah, I guess if she's a cool high school girl, then she's going to go out with a cool college guy. I guess that makes sense. But I remember thinking as soon as I got to college, the guys who were going out with high school girls were losers. They were not cool. I mean, at least the ones I knew. Maybe there were some exceptions and maybe I'm offending some listeners and I apologize if I am. But I just remember like the dudes who I knew in college who were dating a high school girl back home, they were doing that because they couldn't get any college girls to go out with them. So it seems a lot cooler when you're in high school. And then as soon as you get to college, you're like, wait a second, these guys aren't cool.
Exactly. So I don't know if it's a test of time thing or a test of just maturing. But Cher, her love life is going nowhere. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, as if dropped from heaven, is this boy that she instantly has a crush on, a new student in the school, this young man named Christian. Very fashionable. He dresses well. He's a nice looking kid. Kind of looks like, I'd say, a slightly younger Jason Priestley.
Yes. To that point, Christian doesn't arrive just out of nowhere. They do actually set him up earlier in the movie when the teacher, Mr. Hall, is like, where is this Christian person? And Cher's like, oh, he spends half of the year in Chicago with his mom, and then he'll be coming to this school like next semester. And she's like, and I think that's wrong because that is a hard thing for a young person to deal with. And Mr. Hall's like, okay, whatever. So then when he shows up, yes, it's out of the blue, but they do kind of set it up. And she is smitten with him right out of the gate. And in order to quote unquote flirt with him, she is doing all of these stupid things like sending herself flowers and chocolates so that she'll appear in demand. You and our listeners know how I feel about voiceover. I hate it, but I did laugh at one of her voiceover lines while she was doing all this stuff where she's like, sometimes you have to show a little skin, and she's wearing a skimpy outfit. And she says, this reminds boys of being naked. And then they think of sex. And she's saying it so matter-of-factly of like, this is what I am doing. And this is why I am doing it. And it's like, no shit. I don't know. I just really like the way she explains that.
Oh, yeah, that's a great line. And she becomes friends with him, and he does become friends with her, and he asks her out. And he arrives at their mansion in Beverly Hills, and he is dressed, it's like a white suit with like a white hat. He looks like a Backstreet Boy, kind of. So it's he looks good for the 1990s. And he comes in, and the dad, he has a great line. He goes, well, you think the death of Sammy Davis left an opening in the Rat Pack?
It is a great line that probably also hasn't really stood the test of time.
You know, Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack was not our time, and I understand that reference. So, I don't know. I wonder if a kid would know that in the 60s there were these cool people called the Rat Pack, or did we kind of get the very tail end of Sinatra's life so that we had heard of him?
I think that's it. I don't think my kids know who the Rat Pack is.
Okay. I did not know who the Rat Pack was when I was 6. How old's your son? 11?
10. He's 10. He knows a lot of stuff.
He's not going to know who the Rat Pack is, or he doesn't know who the Brat Pack is either, but he would recognize some of those actors.
He loves the Frat Pack, though.
What the Frat Pack is like? What, Will Ferrell and the Wilson brothers and like that era, right?
Yeah.
Like the dodgeball people, like that whole cast,
like the old school and
Vince Vaughn. Yeah.
But Cher is flirting hardcore with Christian. Christian doesn't seem to be that interested. He says he's going to come over to her place to watch movies, and he's really into Tony Curtis, and as Cher calls it, the movie Sporadicus. We just were talking about Spartacus in our That Thing You Do episode. But she doesn't understand why Christian is not into her, and it's Murray, Donald Faison's character, who explains that Christian is gay. The way he says it is, he says, quote, he's a disco dancing, Oscar Wilde reading, Streisand ticket holding friend of Dorothy, which is not the most PC way to describe someone who's gay. But to this movie's credit, they don't mock Christian for being gay. You know, as soon as Cher figures it out, they remain friends and they still hang out all the time. And Christian's a good guy and she's a good friend to him. And, you know, once she knows that, they're actually able to become better friends. I mean, I think he's fairly two-dimensional, but to be fair, most of the male characters in this movie are fairly two-dimensional. I mean, you could argue that most of the female characters in the movie are somewhat two-dimensional, except for Cher and Ty. But that said, he's not the butt of any jokes. So that's a good thing.
Right, there's this line when he first meets her. Cher is trying to flirt with him, so she knocks her pencil over, and he bends over and picks it up, and he looks at her legs. I thought he was going to say something like, nice Jimmy Choos or something, and I was going to go, that's the clue or something, but they kind of chose to give him this, like, really this Rat Pack thing. Like this, he talks in a 1960s slang, and he just goes, hey, nice stems, and, you know, it's not a gay stereotype, it's just, it's kind of cool. That's just the way the guy talks.
And he's right. Those are great stems. I would be inclined to agree. But, Cher doesn't have her license, and that's a recurring thing that she wishes she had her license. Actually, that's one of the other memorable lines in the movie, or a line that I remember at least, when she's driving and Dion says, Cher, that was a stop sign. And Cher says, what? I totally paused. But she goes for her driving test and she fails because she's doing terribly. And she's like hitting a parked car. She almost kills a guy on a bicycle. But when she gets home, Ty is there and she says, hey, I'm over Elton, but I really like Josh. And this sends Cher into a tailspin. And she can't quite figure out why at first, but through the magic of voiceover, as she's working through her feelings, she realizes, I like Josh. This is one of those examples of the voiceover where they really spell it out. They could have just had her figure it out without the voiceover, but whatever. She decides that she's going to be a better person now, not because it'll help her like it was with her teachers, not because it's like a pet project like it was with Ty, but because she wants to be a genuinely better human being and because she thinks it will impress Josh. So I guess it's not a ton of emotional growth.
Right. And, even worse than just spelling it out for you in the voiceover was they have what, in my opinion, it's one of the cardinal sins of a movie. I hate flashbacks within a single film. If it's like a murder mystery and you can now look at it like The Sixth Sense and go, yes, all this happened, that works perfectly. But I thought it was completely unnecessary for her to show all the scenes of just Paul Rudd, essentially. And it didn't really add anything to it. And, Josh, he speaks the way that I thought when I was a kid and I first saw this, the way that quote unquote college people speak. He's reading Nietzsche by the pool. He's the archetype of what I thought a sophisticated college person would sound like. And he says this line to Cher when they're talking, and she was earlier talking about how she did such a nice thing by setting the teachers up, and he immediately sees through it, and he says, I'm sure you did that for your own purposes, not for theirs. And he says, right in the beginning of the film, I never really caught this until this time, he goes, if you ever did something that was purely altruistic, I'd be shocked. Like, something that wasn't just selfish. And then at the end, she kind of has this revelation. She just starts asking Miss Geist, like, how can I help out with the Pismo Beach disaster? Which I don't know if that's a real thing, but I'm guessing
it's not.
Okay, I'm guessing it was like the Exxon Valdez kind of thing, maybe an oil spill.
Pismo Beach is a real place, but there was never a disaster there. That was made up.
Well, of course, everyone who's ever watched Bugs Bunny knows he goes, Pismo Beach and all the clams you can eat. That's what he's always burrowing for. He's trying to get to Pismo Beach.
Okay.
I should have taken that left turn at Albuquerque. You've never seen these Bugs Bunny? All the listeners know what I'm talking about.
Literally no one knows what you're talking about. If anyone knows what James is talking about, tweet us at Test of Time Pod and prove me wrong. You never check the Twitter, so you'll never know. And I'll never tell you.
Exactly.
But basically, Cher and Josh hook up. Cher patches things up with Ty. Ty does get together with Travis, the stoner, who, by the way, has this conversation with Cher where he's like giving up all of his bongs and his pot stuff. And he's saying that he's in a 12-step program, like a 12-step program for pot, I guess? Like, what? That's weird.
Yeah, this is still one of those mid-90s, like, as the guy gets better, he's gonna have to, of course, give up all of his his stoner ways. And yeah, it's kind of an outdated thing, but the film ends with a voiceover. And I do think this voiceover is good because they do get you. And she goes, well, Josh and I got together and things ended the way you knew they would. And then they flash to a wedding scene with a bride and groom and, a lot of people gather around. And she just goes, as if I'm only 16 and this is California, not Kentucky. And as it turns out, it's not her wedding. It's Miss Geist and Mr. Hall.
Right. And Cher catches the wedding bouquet, which I guess means she's next to get married, which is weird because, like you just said, she is only 16. But the movie ends playing the song Tenderness by General Public. Weird trivia. This is actually the fourth movie that we've reviewed that features that song. Can you name any of the others?
Oh, yeah. Cube.
Nope.
Was it Superman 3?
Nope.
Oh, and The Mighty Ducks.
No, you got all of those wrong. The one I always remember, whenever I hear this song, I think of Weird Science, but it was also in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles. It's an 80s song that they used in this movie, but it's a very popular song.
All right, I guess now is time to let the listeners know. We have General Public right here is going to play just a clip of it. Can we hear a live version of it, folks? Go ahead.
Tenderness, where is the tenderness?
Wow, thank you so much, guys. It's really a pleasure. I don't really have any time to ask you about your award-winning career or, music industry, but thanks a lot and take care. They're waving on webcam and disconnect.
I don't know that they ever won any awards, but it's sweet that you think so. Well, James, that is the end of 1995's Clueless. Do you think this movie stands the test of time?
I wonder about that song, Tenderness. I wonder if John Hughes got some really weird licensing deal where he licensed it for Weird Science and then was able to use, the license technically was for 5 years to use it. And he therefore used it in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and 16 Candles.
Maybe.
I mean, that does seem kind of weird. It's like that one time when Conan O'Brien, he got the clip of Carlton Fisk's famous home run, and he goes, we had to buy the rights to that, but you have to buy a minute of it, so we only played it for 5 seconds here. So he wound up showing it 10 more times during the episode to get his money's worth, or 12 more times. But anyway, it's interesting. Amy Heckerling, she was able to get probably the hardest genre that's possible in any art form, which is to really nail young people when you're not young. I'm not talking about, the savant at 17 that writes and pens her own novel, and it's a great teen novel. I'm talking about Amy Heckerling did this twice in 2 different decades. I mean, John Hughes was able to get it half a dozen times, but this is in some ways even more impressive because you can argue that John Hughes, he just understood 80s teens. And, he never really did get a huge 90s teen movie, but Amy Heckerling was able to get the early 80s and mid 90s. That is a completely different generation of teens. And she was able to get possibly the most iconic teen film that tells you about that era of American history. So it's very well done in that respect. The soundtrack is totally of the time. The fashion, to be perfectly honest, I never understood it as just a suburban New York teenager, but I understood it as this is ridiculous what Beverly Hills people might be wearing. So that was fine for me. And I guess all what they called so-called stoners were wearing just kind of grunge outfits, which was, in my recollection, what everyone was wearing. So I do think that for the most part, those things do hold up. The acting is, it's mostly good. I can't tell in some ways if some of the actresses are trying to act kind of ditzy because that's supposed to be their characters, or if maybe some of the lines are just not really delivered well. But the movie has comedy going for it. It's very funny. It's got a great cast. You don't really see a lot of these people after this film, but I never saw Ms. Geist again, and a lot of the other teenagers you didn't see again. Stacey Dash, she wound up having a career in politics, I think, but
as a Fox News commentator.
Yeah, you don't really see her as an actress anymore. Even Alicia Silverstone, I don't think she's acting as much, but this works for 1995. It's great. great. A couple things about this film. One small and then one not so small. Small things, the scene of her getting mugged really bothers me. That she has this awful line. A guy has a gun to her head, possibly the scariest moment you could have in your life. And she's like, oh, but I don't want to get on my knees because I have a really important dress on. I didn't buy that. That seemed to be not even her character. I don't think would say something that dumb. That scene always did bother me. But the thing about this film that I've been wondering, I haven't seen this film in probably 15 years. I was wondering, is the thing that I hated about this film, am I going to hate it less? And that's Cher getting together with her stepbrother, who I understand is completely unrelated to her. It's kind of weird to me.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't say it's wrong. It's just, I mean, he's also like a sophomore or so, and she's like 16, so it is kind of a little weird. And also, does this 16-year-old wind up having this boyfriend throughout college in her young 20s? Does she basically marry her stepbrother, aka her high school sweetheart? You know, I can totally understand why it's not wrong for many arguments. And it's just kind of a little off to me. But that's the one thing about the film that just bothers me. Otherwise, I really like this film. You know, you don't like everything about a film. So for me, yes, 1995's Clueless does stand the test of time. What do you think, Al? What about this film does not stand up?
Well, I mean, look, there are definitely a lot of dated references in the movie. We mentioned some. There's the fact that they love hanging out at the mall, which we've talked about in other movies, namely Mallrats, that malls aren't that much of a popular destination anymore. At one point, Josh says that he's trying to get a tree planted by a celebrity, Marky Mark. That doesn't stand the test of time. There's the fact that they're looking at a map to find this party, and Cher takes pictures on an old school camera. And they make a couple of like politically correct jokes in here. Cher says to Amber, who's like her rival, do you prefer fashion victim or ensemble challenged? And when they're talking about how Cher is a virgin, they say that she's hymenally challenged. So, you know, like at this point in 1995, being politically correct was kind of a punchline. They do use the R word once or twice, which doesn't really sit so well in 2020. At one of the parties they go to, the Mighty Mighty Bosstones are playing, you know, and we talked about that kind of music in our Swingers episode, that, you know, big band music was really popular for a couple of minutes in the mid 90s, and that kind of went away. Another thing that I noticed was there was a lot of jokes about how Cher and Dion don't eat, and, you know, they have to be skinny, and that means just never eating. You know, if she drinks like a couple of mochachinos, she needs to throw up. You know, she references at one point, like those kinds of jokes, I think don't really work anymore. I think it's not funny to, you know, make light of eating disorders. One thing that I think did stand the test of time, though, is the fact that Cher was drinking a lot of Starbucks. Did you notice that? Like, this is 1995. I don't remember Starbucks being a big deal until the later 90s. Apparently, they had their IPO in 92, so they were around. Maybe it's just that we on the East Coast didn't have that many of them at that point, but it almost seemed like she was ahead of her time by drinking Starbucks in 1995.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's probably that time caught up to this cool Beverly Hills thing.
Yeah. Something else that stands the test of time is the fact that this movie could have been Lily White taking place in Southern California, in Beverly Hills. I never watched Beverly Hills 90210, but our friend Jeff in college had 1 million posters up in his apartment, and there were no black people in any of those posters. In the Clueless poster, it's the 3 girls, and one of them is black.
And they don't make a big deal about it.
No, they absolutely don't. They don't make a big deal about the gay character. That's a good thing, obviously. This is neither here nor there in terms of standing the test of time, but at certain points, Cher is watching Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy, which makes sense because it's a Paramount movie and Paramount owns MTV. And yeah, I'd say Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy, kind of stand the test of time, at least as far as I'm concerned, because I like them.
You mean you remember them?
Exactly. So that counts, I guess. Look, obviously I don't love voiceover. I could maybe give it a half of a pass because it's based on a novel, Emma by Jane Austen. So okay. But regardless of that, this movie is really carried by Alicia Silverstone. She is in practically every scene. She's got the voiceover going, throughout. And she is, on her surface, a terrible person. She is a stuck-up, vain, self-centered, selfish jerk. She is every girl who wouldn't have given me the time of day in high school. I should hate her. But I didn't hate her in 1995, probably because I was in love with her because she was the beautiful girl from the Aerosmith videos. But I think that you do get a sense of her life and her perspective and what she's going through. And maybe the voiceover helps with that, as much as I hate to admit it. I think there's a lot of voiceover that could have been cut. Whatever. I won't belabor that point. But I think it's a really good movie. I think it's really entertaining. I think Alicia Silverstone is fantastic. Paul Rudd is effortlessly charming. The two of them have good chemistry. I don't know that they hooked up on set, but if you had told me that they did in real life, I would have totally believed that, just because they have really good chemistry together. Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. This movie definitely stands a test of time. Amy Heckerling, you're 2 for 2 as far as the Test of Time podcast is concerned. I'm sure that means a lot to you.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because both of these teen films were modern teen films, but I think that they stand the test of time because they become now iconic teen films of that era. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's slang in either of those films that teens say today, but I think they could relate to either of those.
Actually, we're 3 for 3 with Amy Heckerling movies because she also directed Look Who's Talking, and we both said that stands the test of time too. So, Amy, we're big fans of yours. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we're going to come back with another teen movie that's also turning 25, the movie Kids. I've never seen it, but I imagine it's very, very different from this movie, from what I've heard about it.
I saw it once when I was like 16 because I had a friend that was into like watching indie films, and I saw it and I just couldn't believe there were people our age that did the things in that film. But I haven't seen it in 20 years or so, over 20 years, and it will be interesting to see what I think about it now.
Yes, it will be. So stay tuned for that episode. Write to us at Test of Time Pod. Tell us your thoughts on teen movies and college guys who date high school girls and the lines from this movie that you remember, that you quoted.
And if you know the Bugs Bunny reference of Pismo Beach and all the clams you could eat, tweet to Al. He won't tell me, but you'll zing him.
Sure. And don't forget to write us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you write something nice, we will read it on the air. Come on, just do it. Why not? Come on, give us some stars. Give us 5 stars. And yeah, we'll see you next week, everybody.
Bye.